On day 13, we will go to the Museum of the Rockies, over to Montana Grizzly Encounter, and then drive south into the northern part of Yellowstone National Park, where we'll go through Gardner, Fort Yellowstone, see Mammoth Hot Springs before driving back to Bozeman for the night. We head out fairly early in the morning, and we get to the Museum of the Rockies as it is opening. This is one of the premier places in the United States to study dinosaurs, and we start seeing them immediately outside the museum. They also have some very beautiful flowers there. This is the route we're going to be taking through the museum. First up, we'll be looking at the dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals. One of the things about this museum is that they believe that dinosaurs were warm-blooded and that some of them even had feathers, like this representation. Here we see where a vertebrae would have been. And then we look to see the leg bones of various ages of these dinosaurs. And finally, a skull. Here we see a dinosaur killed by a Deinonychus, or terrible claw. They know that's what did it because there's a tooth of one still stuck in the skeleton, and you can see the claw marks here. And this is a clutch of eggs. They have now found that some of the dinosaurs here actually were burrowers and lived underground. In the Hall of Horns and Teeth, we find Triceratops comparisons and also Tyrannosaurus Rex comparisons of various skulls at different ages. Here we have a T-Rex growth series of them getting older and older, and larger and larger. Now we look at how the Triceratops skulls changed with time, going from oldest to youngest. Here we have a teenager skull, and here we have a mature skull. There were two different species of Triceratops depending upon the size of the nasal horn. And here we have an Ankylosaurus. The Pachycephalosaurus, here we have a growth set of their skulls. They use the hard bone on the top, kind of like rams use horns today. Next we come to a section about the history of Yellowstone National Park. People have been visiting here for a long time. And then we look at Native American cultures, especially the Plains Indians. This is a few of the many thousands of bison skulls that were killed. Tar paper shacks like this were used by homesteaders that were coming to the prairies. They needed cheap houses that were fast to build, so instead of using the heavy wood construction of Europe, they used light lumber, rough cut, to build their houses. They said they'd blow away like a balloon in a storm, but they really didn't. And now we come to the Genghis Khan exhibit. Here we have a passport. It says, "I am the emissary of Khan. If you defy me, you die." And here's a magnetic one in 3 languages that hook together. And here's the Emperor's sword. The man who would become known as Genghis Khan was actually born Temujin. He was the son of a chief but rejected at his father's death and lived in poverty, but will eventually have a huge kingdom, and this is his heir. Shaman played a large part in the Mongol Empire, and Genghis Khan had many as advisors. Their traditional Mongol nomadic dwelling was called a gur. All Mongols were warriors. What Genghis Khan did was teach them to fight as units rather than fight as individuals. And this is a typical mounted soldier with an armored horse, his recurved bow, his shield, and his sword, and his armor. Without the horse, there would have been no Mongol army. They had a saddle that fit very tight, so they could actually lay backwards, turn around backwards, and fire even under the horse. The flat stirrups allowed them to stand and fire their bows, and they had bits for control of those horses. Their composite recurve bows are like what we use today, and they could shoot 350 yards with armor-piercing arrows. They carried short swords for in-close combat. Their chainmail was covered by a closely knit silk so that arrows could be pulled out easily. And they used catapults in their fighting. They had siege crossbows that could shoot flaming bolts at the enemy, and also had hand cannons that used gunpowder. Got it from the Chinese. Buddhism eventually became their main religion, but they were not anti any religion, and their capital had over 12 worship sites for 12 different religions in it. Their capital was Karakorum in the 13th century and had about 10,000 people that lived inside it, with many different tents around the outside. They loved their music. Buddhism is still their main religion, and they celebrate most of the festivals. As we leave, standing at the gate is Rusty. Now we head over to Montana Grizzly Encounter. Soon we arrive and start to learn about bears, grizzlies in particular, but all bears. And there's Deborah the Explorer with the bears. They only have one bear on display when we get there, and it's relatively hot for them, so he's just laying in the shade and cooling as much as he can. Male grizzlies can go up to 550 pounds and females to 350. They're omnivores and eat just about anything. Since we're getting through relatively early this day, we decide to head down to Yellowstone National Park and see the northern part of the park. We follow the Yellowstone River as it heads south toward Yellowstone Park. Soon we're in Gardner, Montana. It is the gateway to the northern entrance of the Yellowstone National Park and has many hotels and restaurants to eat at. It's basically a tourist town. And now we're entering the park. We'll be coming in through the north entrance, and we'll be using our pass so we won't have to pay. You have to keep your eyes open. There's some pronghorn, our first wildlife. Once inside, we head south. Along the way, we stop to look at the Gardner River. We'll be following along beside it as we head into the park. The elk don't seem to be scared of much of anything. They're right outside these buildings at Fort Yellowstone, and we'll be just walking down the street in Fort Yellowstone with hundreds of people around. We have now entered the park, and we're going to be looking around this area at Mammoth Hot Springs and the park headquarters. You have Mammoth Hot Springs here and Fort Yellowstone. We'll be looking at Fort Yellowstone first, The aerial pictures came from a video I bought while we were there. When they first started Yellowstone, they had so many poachers that almost all the animals were being wiped out, so they moved an army unit here and built a fort called Fort Yellowstone that still exists today. The red buildings were their headquarters and their barracks. Today is the headquarters of the park, and it's where the park rangers stay. During the winter, this is the only area of the park that is left open. The rest of it is pretty well closed down with heavy snow, except for snowmobiles. But our main thing we want to see is the Mammoth Hot Springs here. This is an area of hot springs that is actually outside the caldera. The Norris Geyser Basin sends a chute off to here, and that's what warms the waters here. There's a lower terrace and an upper terrace. We'll be looking at the lower terrace first, and we'll be looking in this area as soon as we park and start walking out on the boardwalk. We'll be following the lead of Deborah the Explorer as she explores, but we have to stay on the boardwalk. It's dangerous here. And there's the Liberty Cabin, an old hot springs cone. We follow the boardwalk on around until we come to Pallet Springs, which is a terrace that comes down off of the upper geyser basin. It has many beautiful colors in it from the various thermophiles or organisms that live in it. These structures have been formed over thousands of years, and about 2 tons of calcium carbonate flow over this each year in solution, and then are deposited to form these formations. It covers about 504 acres and is at 170 degrees Fahrenheit when it comes out of the ground. As that water cools, it deposits something called travertine, which is calcium carbonate. This comes from dissolving the limestone as it comes here, and then as it cools, it drops it into solid form. As you can see, it bubbles out of the ground and runs over the terrace, depositing its calcium carbonate, so the terrace is constantly changing, and all the colors you see are from various organisms that live in the water and off the calcium carbonate. As it gets further and further from the open source, it gets cooler. And thermophiles, living organisms that live in this kind of habitat, are starting to live in that water now as it gets cooler. These are mats of algae. And this dark stone sticking up to the left is called the Devil's Thumb. Elk have come to this area because it's fairly warm and a nice place to stay in the cold weather. The Mammoth Hot Springs area is bigger than it looks. It extends under all of Fort Yellowstone and over across the road to the Opal Terrace. It's now time to look at the main terrace up the hill. We have 2 ways of getting there. We can climb up some steps, or we can drive around on a road up to the top. We choose the easy way. Along the way, we're going to see Canary Spring. We'll be driving along the Upper Terrace Drive. Soon we park at the main terrace overlook, and Alan goes out walking to get pictures of what's going on. We're there where it says "You are here" as we look over. And that's the steps up from the bottom. And this is the main terrace. Down there is Fort Yellowstone. Looking on around, we come to Canary Spring. It flows rather strongly down the hill. This is what we looked at as we were coming around to the road, but we looked at it from the bottom side. As you can see here, the water is bubbling pretty strongly. Next we come to Cupid Springs. It's a small area, but very beautiful with its colors of yellow. Moving around further, we come to Grassy Springs, as it flows out of a grassy area and heads down toward the main terrace. As you can see from the various colors, there's organisms that live here also. Now we head out to go around the Upper Terrace Drive and see some of the other features that are up here. First up is the Highland Terrace. Then we come to the Tangerine Springs and its beautiful colors. You can see the water bubbling right at the top as it pours down across the face of this hill. Beautiful little waterfall here. I can't tell. You can see it bubbling out of the top. Then we head out through the stunted forest to see some of the rest of this area as we continue to drive along the Upper Terrace Drive. Eventually we come to the Aphrodite Terrace and its beautiful cone. On a little further is the White Elephant Back Springs and Terrace. Then we come to Angel Terrace. And it's truly beautiful with the trees and the terrace as we look at it through the dead trees. Now it's time to leave the Upper Terrace Drive and head back toward Fort Yellowstone. Along the way, we stop one more time to look across the main terrace from a different vantage point. There's Canary Spring. Then we head back toward Fort Yellowstone. We drive back past Mammoth Hot Springs. And on through Fort Yellowstone. The elk have decided to take up residence on the clinic yard. Hope nobody needs to go to the clinic. As we head on back toward Gardner, we run into some elk out feeding in the Gardner River. And then we come to Roosevelt Arch, the traditional entrance to the northern gateway into Yellowstone. It was built by President Theodore Roosevelt to mark the beginning of this park. We pass back through Gardner and keep on heading northward toward Bozeman. We will again be following the Yellowstone River as we head north. Soon we're arriving back in Bozeman, and we head to eat at Outback Steakhouse before returning to our hotel for the night. And that brings us to the end of day 13.